There is a question that has troubled serious thinkers across every civilization that has ever produced serious thinkers. Why do good men so often lose? Not always, not without exception, but with a consistency that is difficult to explain if you believe, as most people prefer to believe, that goodness is its own protection. That a man of genuine virtue, of genuine honesty and genuine generosity and genuine care for the people around him, will be rewarded by the world for those qualities in proportion to their genuine value. The evidence does not support this belief. I watched good men lose across my entire career. Not to men who were more capable or more intelligent or more deserving in any meaningful sense. To men who were simply less constrained by the qualities that made the good men good. Who were willing to do things the good men were not willing to do. Who operated in the space between what was ethical and what was effective with a freedom that the good men had denied themselves. And I watched this pattern repeat with a consistency that eventually forced me to ask the question that most serious thinkers prefer not to ask directly. What does goodness actually cost? Not in the abstract, in the specific. In the real world of real men pursuing real stakes in conditions that do not reward virtue automatically and do not protect the virtuous from the consequences of their virtue. What does it actually cost to be good in a world that is not arranged to reward goodness? My name is Niccolò Machiavelli. I'm going to give you the honest answer to that question. Not the comfortable answer. Not the answer that confirms what you would prefer to believe about how virtue is rewarded and wickedness punished. The honest answer. And then I am going to give you something more important than the answer. I am going to give you the understanding that allows a man to be genuinely good without paying the specific costs that goodness, deployed without strategic intelligence, consistently produces. Because those are two different things. And the difference between them is everything. I want to begin with the observation that produced the most controversy of anything I ever wrote. In The Prince I stated that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. This statement has been read for 5 centuries as an endorsement of wickedness. As an argument that goodness should be abandoned in favor of the effective ruthlessness that the world actually rewards. This reading is wrong. And it misses the specific and important point I was making. I was not saying that goodness is bad. I was saying that goodness deployed as a fixed policy regardless of circumstance is expensive. That the man who is good in every situation, who applies his virtue uniformly without reference to whether the situation calls for it or whether the people he is being good to deserve it or whether the goodness is being exploited by people who have already decided not to reciprocate it, will be exploited by men who have made no such commitment. The commitment to be good in every circumstance is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. Because it communicates to every person who encounters you that your goodness is unconditional, that it will be extended regardless of what you receive in return, that there is no cost for taking advantage of it. And human beings, as I have written in other contexts, respond to incentives. If the incentive structure makes taking advantage of your goodness costless and rewarding, a significant portion of the people you encounter will take advantage of it, not because they are uniquely wicked, because the incentive structure makes it rational. The man who understands this does not respond by becoming wicked. He responds by becoming strategic about his goodness, by being good toward people who deserve goodness and withholding it from people who are exploiting it, by extending his virtue where virtue is reciprocated and withdrawing it where it is consumed without return. This is not the abandonment of goodness. It is the intelligent deployment of it. The first specific cost of undifferentiated goodness is what I would call the exploitation of the unconditional. The man who is known to be good unconditionally, who will help anyone who asks and extend generosity to anyone who needs it and maintain his honesty regardless of the cost, has communicated something to the world that the world will act on. He has communicated that his resources, his time, his energy, his reputation, his goodwill, are available to anyone who asks for them without condition. And the world, which contains many people who are very good at identifying and exploiting available resources, will send him a continuous stream of people who want exactly those things and who have no particular intention of reciprocating. I watched this pattern destroy capable men across my career. Not dramatically, gradually, through the slow accumulation of extractions that each individually seemed reasonable and that collectively consumed the resources that would have built the position, the capability, the reputation that genuine goodness, strategically deployed, could have produced. The man who gave his time to everyone who asked for it had no time left for the work that would have made his time genuinely valuable. The man who extended his generosity without discrimination had no generosity left for the people who deserved it most. The man who maintained his honesty in every situation, including the situations where honesty was weaponized against him, found that his honesty was consistently used to harm him by people who were not honest in return. The unconditional nature of his goodness was not a virtue in these situations. It was a policy of unconditional resource transfer to anyone willing to exploit it. Strategic goodness does not have this problem. The strategically good man is generous toward people who have demonstrated that they will use his generosity well. He is honest in situations where honesty serves genuine communication rather than in situations where it has been invited specifically to be weaponized. He gives his time to the people and the work that deserve it rather than to everyone who asks for it. He is genuinely good. And his goodness is genuinely valuable precisely because it is not available to everyone unconditionally. The second cost of undifferentiated goodness is what I would call the signaling of exploitability. There is a specific dynamic in human competition that the unconditionally good man almost always fails to understand until it has already cost him significantly. The signal of unconditional goodness in a competitive environment is not read by competitors as evidence of character worth respecting. It is read as evidence of a constraint worth exploiting. The man who will not use certain methods because they conflict with his values has communicated to his competitors exactly which methods are safe to use against him. He will not retaliate in kind. He will not match the escalation. He will absorb the cost of their methods while constrained from using those methods himself. This asymmetry in competitive situations is not sustainable. The man who is constrained by his values from the full range of methods available to his competitors is fighting with one hand behind his back against people who are using both hands. I am not arguing that the response to this asymmetry is to abandon the constraints. I am arguing that the response is to understand clearly what the constraints cost and to ensure that the cost is not being incurred unnecessarily. The man who is good toward people who are not good toward him, who maintains his ethical constraints with people who have no such constraints and who are exploiting the asymmetry deliberately, is not demonstrating virtue. He is demonstrating naivety. And naivety in a competitive environment has a specific and consistent cost that virtue alone cannot compensate for. The strategic response is to recognize when the asymmetry is being exploited and to address it directly. Not by abandoning the constraints but by making the exploitation more expensive. By withdrawing the goodness that is being exploited. By making clear that continued exploitation will have costs that the exploiter had not anticipated. This is not wickedness. It is the accurate communication that your goodness is not unconditional. That it is extended on the basis of genuine reciprocity and withdrawn when that reciprocity is absent. That communication changes the incentive structure. And changed incentive structures change behavior. The third cost of undifferentiated goodness is the one I find most philosophically significant and the one that took me longest to understand clearly. The cost to the world of goodness that is not protected by capability. I observed this with a consistency that I found genuinely disturbing across my career. Good men, men of genuine virtue and genuine care for the people around them, losing to men of considerably less virtue simply because their goodness was not accompanied by the capability to protect and advance it. And the consequence of their losing was not simply that they were personally diminished. The consequence was that the people they were good toward, the people their goodness was genuinely serving, were also diminished. Were left in worse positions than they would have been in if the good man had been willing to develop the capability that genuine service to others actually requires. I wrote about Savonarola in this context. A man of genuine religious conviction and genuine care for the Florentine people. Who preached with real fire and real sincerity and who moved an entire city with the quality of his genuine goodness. And who was destroyed by men of considerably less goodness because his goodness was not accompanied by the political capability that survival in a politically treacherous environment required. He refused to use the methods that would have protected him because those methods conflicted with his values. And in refusing, he not only destroyed himself. He destroyed the movement he had built and left the people who had followed him worse off than if he had been less pure and more capable. This is the cost of goodness that troubles me most deeply. Not the cost to the good man himself. The cost to the people his goodness was supposed to serve. The man who refuses to develop the capability to protect his goodness, who maintains his purity at the expense of his effectiveness, is not serving the people who depend on his goodness. He is serving his own comfort with his own self-image. Genuine goodness requires the capability to protect and advance it, not the willingness to be destroyed rather than compromise. Develop the capability. Protect the goodness. The goodness is worth more in the world than your purity in defeat. The fourth cost of undifferentiated goodness concerns what I would call the confusion of kindness and weakness. The man who is good unconditionally is frequently read by the people around him as a man who is good because he cannot be otherwise, whose goodness is not a choice but a constraint, who is kind because he lacks the capability to be otherwise rather than because he has chosen kindness from a position of genuine strength. This reading produces a specific and damaging consequence. The kindness is not respected. It is taken for granted. It is treated as a feature of the environment rather than as a genuine gift. And the man who extends it is not valued for it in proportion to its genuine worth. I observed this dynamic repeatedly across my career. The man who was kind because he was genuinely strong, who was good from a position of genuine capability and chose goodness when other options were available, was valued for his goodness in a way that the man who was good because he had no other options was not. Because the goodness of the strong man carries information that the goodness of the constrained man does not. It says that you are worth being good toward, that you have been assessed by someone who had other options and found worthy of the one that cost the most. That assessment from a man who had other options is valuable in a way that the automatic goodness of a man who had no other options never is. This is why I counsel the development of capability alongside the development of virtue. Not because capability should be used to harm, but because capability makes the choice of goodness genuinely a choice rather than a default. And a choice made genuinely from genuine capability carries a weight that a default never does. Be good because you have chosen to be good, not because you have no other option. The choosing requires the capability to choose otherwise. Develop it, and then choose goodness. Every time. The fifth cost is the one most directly applicable to any man living in the specific conditions of the modern world. The cost of goodness in environments that do not reward it and do not punish its absence. I wrote for men navigating the courts of Renaissance princes, environments where the stakes were immediate and the consequences of naivety were severe and visible. The modern man navigates different environments with different specific pressures but the same fundamental dynamic. Environments where the exploitation of goodness is costless, where the unconditionally helpful are exploited without consequence, where the unconditionally honest are disadvantaged without recognition, where the unconditionally generous are consumed without reciprocity. The modern environment does not make goodness easier than the Renaissance court. In some ways it makes it harder because the exploitation is less visible and the costs accumulate more slowly and the recognition of the pattern requires more careful observation than the immediate consequences of naivety in a high-stakes political environment. The man who deploys his goodness without strategic intelligence in the modern environment pays the same costs his Renaissance predecessors paid. He simply pays them more slowly and with less clarity about what is producing them. The strategic response is the same. Not the abandonment of goodness, the intelligent deployment of it. The discrimination between situations where goodness serves genuine good and situations where it is simply being exploited. The development of the capability that makes goodness a genuine choice. The withdrawal of goodness from people and situations that have demonstrated they will exploit rather than reciprocate it. This is not cynicism. It is the accurate application of limited resources toward the purposes they were intended to serve. Your goodness is a resource. It is a valuable one. Deploy it where it will produce genuine good. Withdraw it from where it is being consumed without return. That is not the abandonment of virtue. It is virtue intelligently practiced. I want to address the objection that I know is forming in the mind of every genuinely good man who has read or heard what I have described today. The objection is this: what I am describing is not goodness at all. Real goodness is unconditional. Real virtue does not calculate its deployment. The man who is good only when goodness is reciprocated and strategic about when to extend and when to withhold is not a good man. He is a calculating man who has adopted the appearance of goodness as a strategy. This objection is serious and it deserves a serious answer. The answer is this. The unconditional goodness that the objection describes is genuinely admirable as an ideal. In a world populated entirely by people of good faith and genuine reciprocity, unconditional goodness would be both practically effective and morally pure. We do not live in that world. We live in a world that contains, alongside the genuinely good and the genuinely reciprocal, a significant number of people who will exploit unconditional goodness without hesitation and without guilt. And the unconditional good man in this actual world does not serve goodness by extending it without discrimination. He funds its exploitation. The question is not whether goodness should be conditional or unconditional in the ideal. The question is what genuine service to goodness requires in the world as it actually is. And in the world as it actually is, genuine service to goodness requires the strategic intelligence to deploy it where it will produce genuine good and withdraw it where it will be exploited. Not because this is the ideal. Because this is what the actual conditions require for goodness to survive and flourish rather than being consumed by the people who have decided to exploit rather than reciprocate it. The genuinely good man in the actual world is not the man of unconditional virtue who is destroyed by people less constrained than himself. He is the man who has developed enough strategic intelligence to protect his goodness from exploitation, enough capability to make his goodness a genuine choice, and enough discrimination to direct his goodness toward the people and purposes that deserve it. That man does more genuine good in the actual world than the man of unconditional virtue who is destroyed before his goodness has fully produced its effect. I want to close with something that I have thought about more carefully than almost anything else I have ever written about. The relationship between goodness and power. Most people conceive of these as opposites. Power corrupts goodness. The pursuit of power requires the abandonment of virtue. The man who wants to do genuine good in the world must accept a position of relative powerlessness because the methods required to acquire power are incompatible with the values required to be good. This is one of the most damaging beliefs in the domain of human action, because it produces exactly the world it claims to be responding to. If the good men accept powerlessness as the price of their goodness, then power is consistently held by people less good than those who could hold it. The world is governed, consistently, by the less good because the genuinely good have accepted the belief that power and goodness are incompatible. I reject this belief, not because power does not corrupt. It does, and the risk is real and must be actively managed, but because the alternative to good men holding power is not a power vacuum. It is bad men holding power. And bad men holding power produces outcomes that are worse for everyone than good men holding power while managing the risk that power corrupts. The genuine service of goodness in the world requires the willingness to pursue the power necessary to protect and advance it. Not because power is intrinsically good. Because goodness without power is consistently defeated by wickedness with power, and the defeat of goodness does not serve the people that goodness was trying to serve. Pursue the power. Manage the corruption it risks. Use it in genuine service of the goodness it was acquired to protect and advance. That is the reconciliation of goodness and power that the objection demands and that the world actually requires. I spent my years of service trying to serve Florence genuinely. I made mistakes. I was not always as good as I wished to be. The pressures of the environment and the specific costs of certain kinds of goodness in certain circumstances produced compromises that I am not entirely comfortable with in retrospect. But I also produced genuine service, genuine counsel, genuine understanding communicated with genuine clarity to the people I served. And I did so from a position of genuine capability that allowed the goodness to be effective rather than merely pure. The prince was not a manual for wickedness. It was an attempt to give good men the strategic intelligence they need to survive and be effective in a world that does not automatically reward virtue. That is what I have been trying to give you today. Not permission to be wicked. The intelligence to be genuinely good in a world that requires more than goodness alone to make goodness prevail. Go be good, strategically, capably, with the full development of your particular nature in genuine service of the genuine good you are capable of doing. The world needs it, and it needs it from men who are strong enough to protect it. Be one of those men.